Good morning, everyone. I trust that you are enjoying your snow day thus far, and that for the most part, you guys have been staying on top of all of your emails and everything else that you've needed to do since, you were asked to do that and everything. So, for today, since we were going to be completing our discussion of the five themes of geography, I didn't really see much point in changing that, so I'm going to go ahead and give you guys the rest of the lecture on YouTube so that you guys can have everything for the quiz that's going to happen tomorrow. And of course, I'll spend a little bit of time after the video giving you an idea of kind of what to expect there. So let's go ahead and get started with the fourth theme of geography. Now, if you went back, this is the third one we discussed yesterday, region, and how that's about cultural similarities. We talked about the Middle East, how even though despite we might think of it as being kind of centered around this area and Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, that area of the world, in truth, it actually stretches all the way across northern Africa because of these cultural similarities. Uh, but that brings us to our fourth theme, human environment interaction, best summarized as the people's relationship with the earth. If you think about it, the environment greatly influences how we go about our lives. The fact that we're staying in today when it's cold and kind of miserable outside tells you one way that we change our responses based upon our environment. And in fact, that's really one of humanity's greatest accomplishments, the fact that we can exist and live and thrive even in environments that animals couldn't, is pretty telling. In fact, if you think about space for a second, you can't really come up with a more inhospitable environment than that. And yet there are people living in it on the International Space Station nearly year round. So that alone tells you that we respond greatly to what's around us, and that has had a tremendous impact on our society. But in turn, we also influence the environment. Now, one way that you might say that we do that is, of course, pollution. This photograph shows India and some of the problems they've had with pollution. Not to mention other kind of more difficult to see effects we have. For instance, in Germany, there is a forest called the Black Forest that is dying because of acid rain, which is basically caused whenever you have acidic or particles binding with water in the atmosphere that gets into the hydrologic cycle and slowly poisons everything around it. So, there's ways we can deal with that as well. But in addition, how people respond to what's around them. So, igloos, for instance, you guys have probably seen these in cartoons and things like that. And in truth, they're actually very effective as survival shelter. People don't generally live in them. They're more there in the event that you find yourself in a difficult situation and you need to survive. Snow has very great insulative properties. But the point is, this influences culture over time. A lot of cultural traditions come out of what is around and what is available. So, for instance, if you think of, you know, the types of foods that your family enjoys on holidays, a lot of the time it is a cultural tradition that is actually based on the physical environment. For instance, if you think about turkey, right? Thanksgiving turkey, that sort of thing. Um, Celebrations like Christmas in Europe were often done with another bird entirely, a goose. But the thing is, turkeys are a lot more common than geese. In addition, they're a lot easier to catch. Turkeys are kind of stupid, in truth. Um, True story, my brother-in-law one time was working in his barn on a truck whenever he saw that there was a smattering of turkeys on his land, and so basically decided, gosh, free turkey. He goes and has this gun that is in his barn. He grabs it and shoots a turkey, and they all run off. So he's like, sweet, free turkey. And then they came back. So he just loads another bullet, shoots another one, and they all ran off, and they all came back again. And he basically kept shooting turkeys till he ran out of ammo. He ended up freezing all the rest of them, gave them some to friends and things like that. But it's almost like they're coming back like, what happened to Steve? Bang! Oh, what happened to Frank? Bang! Oh, it's sort of like the dodos, I imagine, from Ice Age. Anyways, but basically when the colonists came to the Americas and they didn't really have the geese, they had turkeys. That changed and evolved to the point where turkey became associated with sort of festivities. And what was interesting is, I believe it was Hormel, I could be wrong on the company here, but they saw, Butterball. They saw, no, actually, I think it was, anyway, it doesn't matter. Point is, this company who basically sold turkeys saw huge sales on Thanksgiving and basically nothing all year round. So they were trying to figure out a way to get people to start consuming them more year round. And this is around the time that televisions were very popular and becoming into their own in the United States. And so they figured if they could make a turkey dinner and freeze it and kind of style it a dinner that you have when you watch TV, maybe they could increase sales, and they did. They actually ended up inventing TV dinners. So the idea of like frozen foods, things like that, came from that as well as other things. The point, though, is again, our culture is reflective of things that begin because of physical changes. And we change to reflect the environment around us. We change the environment ourselves, though, too. Another great example of how we change the environment is actually Las Vegas. Now, I'm going to hop out of the PowerPoint here for half a second. I'll get back to all this stuff in just a second. Let me just show you a picture. I don't know if you guys have ever taken the time to look at what Las Vegas looks like, but it's pretty telling to see how we influence the environment. And frankly, the West, as we know it, the western part of the United States, would not have been able to be settled without two main technologies. The first one is irrigation. Bringing water to areas where there isn't is kind of an old tradition. In fact, if you look at the ancient Romans and the aqueducts and the Persians and the Qanats, you have a system of irrigation that goes back centuries, but modern irrigation allows for greenery where it wouldn't normally exist. So let's just Google Las Vegas from the air. Well, quite from space. But let's turn up some Google images here, and I think we can find a pretty good one. All right, so that's kind of okay. But this is really kind of more what I was looking for. You see, it's all this green in the middle of the freaking desert. It's in the middle of nowhere, and the fact that people can live there, that we have changed the environment to suit our needs, is pretty impressive. It's awe-inspiring in a lot of ways. But that's irrigation. The second technology that made settling the West possible was, of course, air conditioning. Air conditioning allows us to be comfortable in environments where we normally wouldn't be. I mean, you live in the South for the most part. You should be used to that by now. Okay, so sushi, right? Another thing that influences our lives is our diet, and the types of foods we tend to eat is genuinely, historically reflective of what is available relatively close. If you think about it, about 110 years ago, the vast majority, around 70% of Americans, were farmers. They lived by making their own food, and over time, technology and specialization allowed for people to not need to do that anymore. They instead had a fewer amount of people creating food for more people. And add this to shipping, which allows us to bring in food from all over the world, means that provided you can pay for it, you can have food from anywhere pretty much at any time. I mean, the amount of options that we have is kind of staggering. But if you look at traditional cuisine, it often reflects its origin. Japan being an island, seafood is very, very common in their cuisine. Not to mention, the Mediterranean cuisine often has a big element of seafood in it as well. And indeed, if you look at the map of the United States, which we'll do later, you look at the food traditions in the different regions of the United States, and you end up coming across things that are indicative of the natural environment. Again, the environment shapes the human's response. Finally, this is another example. So in Central Asia, areas that we think of like Mongolia, this area is very flat. It's actually a type of climate region known as steppe, S-T-E-P-P-E, flat grasslands. And frankly, it's not very good farmland. If you try to grow stuff there, it, generally speaking, dries out too fast. You can keep it with irrigation, but it's really inefficient. And frankly, it takes a lot of technology. Historically, the way people have lived there is they use what natural resources are there, which is grass. Now, of course, humans can't eat grass and not gain any nutrition from it, but other animals can. Sheep, goats, and even camels, things like that, can basically turn grass into meat. So what happened is the peoples living in this area had large flocks of animals that they would allow to graze, and they'd follow them along, and they would go from pasture to pasture in a nomadic lifestyle. These groups lived on the horse. It was said that, they were pretty much born on the horse. Children as young as 4 were taught to ride, and they were experts at it. However, that meant their housing had to be portable. And so you have the traditional yurt or ger, depending on whether you're talking from a Turkish, Mongoloid, or Hungarian, perspective, gives you this kind of tent, essentially. But what's interesting is this picture, the one in the top left and top bottom right, it's the same place. There are people who still live like this. It's the earliest version of mobile home. And yet, if you look at the bottom right, you see they've got computer, television, they've got refrigerators, kind of modern conveniences, but it's portable. And the fact is, even with modern technology, folks live pretty much the same way they have. Now, that being said, there are modern cities. Ulaanbaatar is, pretty much indistinguishable from pretty much any other major city. But that being said, we see this environmental response as we deal with the environment and change our lifestyle to reflect it. So it's just kind of a neat thing. Okay, so the last and final theme, the 5th theme of geography, is movement. And basically it deals with the concept of diffusion. If you think about culture, it has a birthplace. Every cultural element does. And it starts in this place usually because of a reason. So, for instance, let's talk blue jeans for a second. I'm sure everyone has a pair of blue jeans. In fact, I read somewhere that every person needs in their wardrobe at least one good pair of blue jeans if they're really going to be, stylish. I don't know anything about that. I'm just copying whatever someone else said. But anyways, the point, though, is that blue jeans actually originated as the wear of coal miners. Denim is very, very thick. It's rugged material, and it's cheap. It was relatively cheap. And since then, nowadays we have designer jeans, which is kind of hilarious when you think about it. It's like, designer coveralls. It's the clothes of laborers, yet now it's high fashion. And a lot of that had to do with the way that it spread. It originated in coal mines, it moved out to different forms of workwear, and eventually emerged to be something much more widely used. And because of that, it changed. Its uses changed. To the day now that in farther places, East Asia, Central Asia, Iran, Iraq, all these different places, jeans are seen as luxury items to some extent. They're desirable, I should say, if nothing else. Now, that being said, hang on, the dog is outside. I'm at a quick pause so I can go take care of him. Be right back. Alrighty, Owen had enough fun playing outside. He wanted to come back in. So where we left off, blue jeans spreading and becoming popular throughout the world, and basically becoming something desirable. And there's a lot of cultural traditions we can look at this. So for instance, McDonald's, fast food, things like that. They've spread it all across the world, but what's interesting is they offer different cuisine based upon where they are. So the menu options in, say, Australia, where beer is actually on the menu, or actually that's Germany, excuse me. In Australia, the burgers are different types of meat, I meant to say. Um, Regardless, depending on where you are, it changes pretty dramatically on what's available. I read somewhere in the news that French fries are the thing that's often seen in East Asian countries. I believe it was in Taiwan I saw where a group of high schoolers, it was like kind of a tradition there for high schoolers to get together and study together over like huge plates of fries. Like everyone would order a fry, just kind of throw them together and kind of eat together, which I guess isn't really terribly different than what you guys do. But that being said, it's a way that something has moved, it's changed. It's a process called cultural diffusion as it moves from a cultural hearth outward and is adopted through a process called acculturation, where we bring it into our culture and it reflects something new. Movies are another prime example of that. Interestingly enough, what we think of as like movies in general originated in the United States. That's not to say that we invented it, not necessarily, but Hollywood remains kind of the large time producer of film, though interestingly enough, not the largest producers of film. Bollywood, the Indian film industry, it produces way more movies than it does in the United States. So that being said, American films are generally more sought because of the high budget and the global impact. Regardless, the movement of ideas isn't the only aspect we can look at with the fifth theme. The physical movement of peoples, the fact that groups of people have moved for a variety of different reasons around the world, the settlement of the Americas, the Bantu migrations in Africa, the forced movement of Africans to the colonies in the transatlantic slave trade. All these are examples of the theme of movement. And probably one of the biggest beginnings of this theme was the Columbian Exchange, the movement of people, places, ideas, and even germs from one place to the other. And we'll be analyzing this as well. So the point is, the fifth theme has to do with the movement of not just things, not just people, but all of the above, and then looking at those impacts. Settle down, elders. So, to summarize, the 5 themes of geography: location, place, region, human environment interaction, and movement. Location is where something is, place is what somewhere is like, region is cultural similarities, human environment interaction is the adaptation to the environment of human beings, and then, and of course the other way around, and then movement is the effects of diffusion. Be sure to have an example in mind for each of those. There's been plenty provided for you, though you can always come up with your own. And otherwise, the rest of the day, I want you guys to be prepared for the quiz that you will have tomorrow. Otherwise, I hope you guys enjoy your snow day. I hope you have a good time and that you get all your work done. So I'll see you then. Take care, guys.